This lesson is part 1 of section 9.4 on factoring out the GCF. So our target for today is to be able to factor out the greatest common factor, which is known as the GCF. So to understand how we're going to actually factor out the greatest common factor, what I want to do is start by looking at something that we're already familiar with, which is an expression like this. If I asked you to simplify this expression, you would just take that 5 and you would distribute it to both the x and the 2 to get 5x plus 10. Now, when we ask you to take out the GCF from a polynomial, like 5x plus 10 here, that means we're just going to be working backwards. So instead of multiplying, like we did here, and distributing to get 5x plus 10, we're going to start with the polynomial and ask you to work backwards to find what you can pull out to get to that original expression like that. So here's that example, 5x plus 10, right here. When I take out the GCF, that means I'm going to pull out the greatest common factor between both terms. Well, 5x and 10 both have a 5 in common. Okay, I can divide 5 by 5 and I can divide 10 by 5. So that's the greatest common factor that fits into both. So I'm going to pull out the 5. And after I take that 5 out of the first term, just imagine you were dividing 5 by 5. You're going to leave you with an x. You're going to do the same thing to the second term. So if I divide 10 by 5, I'm left with 2. Okay, that's a positive 2, so I would write x plus 2 inside the parentheses. So as you can see, that's how you factor and take out the GCF. Now, we can always check our answer also. So let me erase really quick. If I want to make sure that this answer here is factored correctly, all I would have to do is multiply it back out to make sure that I get back to this original part here. So if I multiply this back out, I would get 5x plus 10, which does check off. Okay, so let's go ahead and start practicing now. Again, we're given a polynomial here, 2x plus 8, and I want to factor out the GCF. Now the GCF of the first and the second term here is going to be a 2. A 2 will divide 2, and a 2 will also divide 8. That's the greatest common factor that both terms have. Okay, we can't use 8. I know some students think it's going to be 8, but we can't divide 2 by 8. We're going to get a fraction here, and we want a whole number, a nice whole number. So it's got to make sure it's divisible by that number. All right, so like I said, 2 is going to be the GCF here. When I pull that 2 out, I'm going to write a set of parentheses, and I'm going to divide the first term by 2. So if I divided that first term by 2, I'd be left with x. When I divide the second term by 2, I'd be left with 4. I'm going to write plus 4 because it's a positive 4. Now, just to check, and we're not going to have to do all this work every time, but we can check the first few times we work on this just to make sure we understand. If I were to distribute this back out, I would end up with 2x plus 8, which is exactly what the original expression is. So I know I'm factoring it correctly. Okay, so our final answer here is just 2 times x plus 4 in parentheses. Now for number 2, same idea. We're going to take out the greatest common factor. In this case, 3 would be the greatest common factor between 3w and 9. So if I pull out a 3, that means I'm dividing the first term by 3. I would be left with just the w here. And if I pull out the 3 from the negative 9 here, I divide negative 9 by 3, and I'm going to get a negative 3. So I want to make sure I drop down minus 3 here in parentheses, and this would be my final answer. We're going to check this real quick. If I distribute, I would get 3w minus 9, and since that's the original problem here, I know I did that correctly. All right, last problem. In this case, the GCF here is going to be 8, because 8 divides 8. And 32 evenly. It's the greatest common factor that they both have. So if we take the 8 out, left over in parentheses, once I divide 8 by 8, I'm left with just the y. And then if I take 32 and divide by 8, I'm left with a positive 4, so I'm going to write plus 4. So that's the very beginning of taking out a greatest common factor and factoring, and we're going to do a lot of factoring the rest of this year, so it's really important that we understand this concept. We'll get a lot of practice tomorrow, and it'll gradually get a little bit more difficult, but as long as you understand the basics, you should be okay. Nice job. We'll see you in class tomorrow.